Let's go ahead and read the Bible reading for today together. Today we'll be reading from two verses. First we'll be reading from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. And then we'll read from John 15, verse 12 together as well. Proverbs 3, verse 5. Proverbs 3, verse 5. It says Luke 14:12, but that is the right verse. That is Proverbs 3, verse 5. They just forgot to change it. That's okay. That's on you guys. That's okay. This part is being sent out and broadcast to all the other satellite churches, right? Okay, because they need to know that you guys made a mistake. This is your version of public shaming. Okay, let's go ahead and read this all together in one voice. Ready, go. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Amen. John 15, verse 12. Let's read this together in one voice as well. Ready, go. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Amen. Amen. So today, we are going to continue our series from last week. We are on our blinded series, right? Blinded by blank. Last week, we talked about what it meant to be blinded by pride. And today, we're going to continue off of that and talk about the second part of this series, which is being blinded by our wounds, by our hurts and by our pains. The subtitle for today is, Let Us See Others Through God's Eyes. If you remember, the subtitle last week was, Let Us See Ourselves Through God's Eyes. Well, today we're going to talk about how we view others. We're going to talk about our other relationships and the other relations that we build in our lives with the other people that God has placed around us. That's what we're going to talk about today. But before we dive into today's main part, I want to quickly summarize last week's sermon because they're all very connected. I need to be careful as I do this today because on Wednesday, I'm preaching to our Korean congregation on Wednesdays in Korean. It's in Korean, but we have very, very talented and very competent translators who are translating my Korean sermons into English simultaneously. So all of you English speakers, you are more than welcome to attend on Wednesdays as well. Some of our college students already are. But on Wednesday, we're currently going through a series on 1 John about love. And I've been preaching on this for a few weeks now, and it's pretty powerful stuff that we're dealing with. And last week, I felt kind of bad. But as I was summarizing the previous week's sermon, that summary turned into a full sermon. And I never really got to the actual sermon part. So I basically ended up preaching on the same passage twice. So I felt a little bad, but I hope I'm going to try not to do that today, because today's sermon is actually really, really important. And I know I really hyped it up last week, but I don't regret it because today's sermon is really important. If you really let today's sermon sink into your hearts, it can really change the way that you relate with those around you. It can really bring restoration in a lot of broken relationships in your life right now. So before we get into that, a quick summary. We talked about 4 different types of people. You guys remember? Yes? No? I hope you remember because we drilled this really well, right? 4 different types. Or the first type. You guys remember? High pride and high self-esteem. Right. So there are 4 types of people. The first one has a high level of pride, but they also have a very high self-esteem, right? So we talked about how these are people who are just really full of themselves. These are the really arrogant type, right? They go around talking very highly about themselves, right? They don't fall into despair very easily. On the outside, they actually might seem very emotionally healthy, right? That's actually the good part of these people, right? They have a very high self-esteem, and that's good. That's good. They're not dismayed very easily. If they fall, they get up very quickly. But the thing is, we talked about how they have a high self-esteem because of their pride, right? They think very highly of themselves, and it's because of that pride in their hearts. That's why they have a very high self-esteem. Second type of person. You guys remember? Low pride and... No, that's third. That's number 3. There, thank you. Low pride and low self-esteem. Exactly. It's the polar opposite of person number 1, right? These people have a humble heart. Why? Because they don't really think well of themselves at all. But that humble heart has been distorted by the enemy to reach a point of low self-esteem. Right? They don't have the boldness that they were meant to have as children of God. Remember, that's what we talked about last week, how we are all children of God. These people criticize themselves way too excessively, and oftentimes they have trouble loving themselves as a result. Category number 2, people who are very down all the time, oftentimes very depressed or downcast. And then we moved on to category number 3. And I told you this is actually where the majority of people lie. Category number 3. You guys remember this one? It's low pride, but... Oh, I'm sorry. I totally messed that up. High pride, but low self-esteem. And it sounds like a paradox, right? But it's absolutely true. And we're going to talk a lot more about this particular category today. But these people look very similar to number 2. Because they're very low, right? They're low energy, oftentimes depressed, but they're actually incredibly prideful inside. Their pride is a little different from the pride of person number 1. But their pains and their emotional scars that they have received, these pains and wounds have oftentimes led these people, category number 3, to be absolutely certain that their thoughts are right, that their experiences justify how they feel. Hence, that leads to what can only be called as pride. But their self-esteem is low because of all the hurt that they've received, right? These are the people who are not able to overcome that hurt in their lives. The hurts and pains, which were never their fault to begin with, but these hurts and pains can end up becoming pride if we let them continue to influence us. This is category number 3. And we talked about how one of the biggest dangers of person number 3 is that they don't even know. They don't know how prideful they are because they have such a low self-esteem. But they are so captured by their own thoughts and so unwilling to let that go that those thoughts of pain and wounds and hurts have turned into pride. Last one, category number 4. What was it? Low pride, but high self-esteem. Also seems paradoxical, but it's absolutely true when we see ourselves through God's perspective. As a child of God, right? That's what we talked about. Being a child of God, we are supposed to have a humble heart, a low heart. But we're also supposed to have a high self-esteem. We're not supposed to cower away or critique ourselves too harshly. Why? Because we are all what? What do we say? We're all children of God. Those of us who believe and are reborn, we are all children of God. We are secure in our identity because that is how God sees us. And we can thus stand firm in all that we do. And we're not perfect, right? So even when we fall, we will fall. But even when we fall, we just quickly get back up. We don't critique ourselves. We don't condemn ourselves. We don't wallow in despair. We get back up because we know that ultimately our true nature, our deep identity is as a child of God. We might look like person number 1, but we are not confident because of our own abilities, right? We are confident because we are what we are by God's grace, like Paul said. We see ourselves through God's perspective, not our own. We see ourselves through God's atonement. You guys remember the picture, right? Can we have the picture ready? We're going to put it up soon. Last week, we applied these principles to how we ought to view ourselves. Right? We are beloved, precious children of God, and that's how God sees us. I made you guys call yourselves, you guys remember what I made you call yourself? Thank you, because if you didn't do it, I was going to make you do it again. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make you do it again. Let's try it one more time. Last week, it was just kind of like only like Rob and a few other people said it. But I actually, you guys like heard the full sermon now, right? Last week. So I'm sure all of you guys believe that you are all princes and princesses. And I really mean this, right? I know it's like a cringing thing to say, but it's true because God is the King of Kings and you are his children. So let's all say this one more time, right? If you are a sister, please call yourself a princess. If you are a brother, call yourself a prince, not a princess. Just avoid that temptation. Okay, so ready? We're going to say it all together in one voice, all right? I am a blank. Are you ready? I want us all to actually do this. Ready? Set, go. I am a princess. Thank you for indulging me. Okay. It's this picture, right? Many people, see, here's the thing. Many people think that they know themselves. This is the reality of our world, right? Many people say, like, I'm pretty self-aware, right? I'm a smart person. I like to think that I know who I am. But to think so would be actually to fall into the first or third category. Prideful. That's pride right there. To think that you know. Thinking that we know ourselves is prideful. Because you see, guys, we're all pained. We're all hurt and pained and flawed and wounded and broken. That's all of us here. So we need to always recognize that because we are all like that, we need to see ourselves through God's perspective. Some people are like, no, but I know myself. You see, that's the first step that we mistook. Even when we look at ourselves, see, this is how we know ourselves to be. Right? All the things that we see on the bottom. For those of you who weren't here last week, sin, fault, failure. This is what we see from man's point of view. But that's why even when we look at ourselves, we need to see ourselves from God's point of view. And when God sees us through the lens of Christ's atonement, he doesn't see our sin, he sees holiness. He doesn't see our faults, he sees us as unblameable. He doesn't see our failure, he sees us as unreprovable. He sees us as perfect, basically. Not a failure, but perfection. Even when we look at ourselves, we need to look through the eyes of someone else, actually. Because when we see ourselves through our eyes, guys, we see all this stuff in the bottom of the picture. But when we see it from God's perspective, that is what will allow us to see the reality of who God created us to be, our true selves, children of God, princes and princesses. Now, this doesn't mean to blindly ignore our flaws, right? Obviously, we still see the elements of ourselves that need work, but those elements actually end up providing more reason for us to draw closer to God, rather than bringing us down into a spiral of despair. And we're going to talk about this a little more later today as well. So this is what it means to see ourselves through God's perspective. That's the summary of last week's sermon. That wasn't too bad, right? I didn't take that long. That was the summary of last week's sermon. Today, I want to apply this to how we view others. Same exact principle. I want you to repeat after me. Let us see others through God's eyes. So we just talked about how when we view ourselves, we need to view through God's lens, his eyes. The same is true for how we view others. If we look at others through our own lens, we can only see their brokenness, their failures, their sins, and their flaws. How messed up they are, how much of a bad person they were to you, how sinful these person are, how much these people have hurt you. That's all we can see, really. I mean, let's just take this time to think about it for a second, right? We can take the picture down now. Just think about this for a second, right? Think about someone that's wronged you. Think about someone that's hurt you. You can't help but see their flaws, their faults, their mistakes. But dearly beloved, that's precisely why we need to view others through God's perspective as well. And throughout the sermon, I want you guys to ask yourselves, and I want to ask you all honestly today as well, how do you view others? How are you viewing the other people in your lives? Some people who are close to you, family maybe, friends, co-workers, fellow church members. How do you view them? Do you view others through your perspective or through God's? Because if you view others through God's perspective, if you look at other people through God's eyes, guys, it's impossible for you to judge them. I guarantee it. You can't judge them. It's impossible for you to hate them. It actually is. Jesus' command to love even your enemies, you guys remember that command in Matthew chapter 5, right? That command to love your enemies, that actually becomes a matter of course. That's not like one of Jesus' extreme commandments that's really hard to follow. No. If you actually see through God's eyes, that's all you can do. Love your enemies. Because you don't see their problems. You don't see them as enemies. You see them from God's perspective. If you look at those people through the lens, right, that lens of Christ's atonement, if you look at a born-again brother or sister as the child of God that he or she is, rather than their failures, you will see success. You will see holiness rather than sin. You will see perfection rather than failure. This is what you can see through Jesus. Guys, you guys know that God doesn't remember our sins, right? You guys know that verse? In Jeremiah 31:34, God says, "For I will forgive their iniquity and I will remember their sin no more." This is not a foreign concept to most of you, right? God doesn't even remember our sins. He just completely, that's what it means for God to forgive us, right? He just forgets it. Like takes it out of his brain like Dumbledore, right? He just like takes like a strand of that memory out and then he tosses it away. But then that leads us to a paradox, right? Because does God like literally forget? Because technically God's omniscient, right? God is omniscient. You know, that means that he knows everything. So how can God be all-knowing but also forget? Have you guys ever thought about this? You guys need to think more. See, when you read the Bible, there are all sorts of these paradoxical questions that come into your mind when you really think about it, right? Like, this doesn't make sense, right? This Jeremiah 31:34 doesn't make sense to some degree. How can God forget when he is all-knowing? Well, it makes sense if you think of Jeremiah 31:34 as what happens when God views us through the lens of Christ's atonement. You see, it matches up perfectly with that picture that we had up there, right? That's God's heart, guys. He knows our flaws. He knows everything that was on the bottom. He knows our flaws, our failures, our shortcomings, our weaknesses. He knows. Of course he knows. But here he is, still promising us in Jeremiah that he will remember our sins no more. He knows our shortcomings, but he is promising to help us nonetheless because he is seeing us through Christ's perspective, through Christ's lens. And it is through this lens that we need to view others around us. Not looking at what seems real to us, not looking at the reality around us, but rather looking at the spiritual reality of what God says. And we're going to talk a lot about this today, but what we see is not what is true. What we see is not what is true. Not all the time, at least. That's the whole point of this series, blinded. Right? We're blind, guys, honestly. To a certain degree, we're all blind. What we see is not the thing. Now here's the thing. We've all tried to love, right? I know all of you. I know most of you, right? We've all tried to do according to Jesus' commandment at some point in our lives, right? We've tried to love our enemies. We've tried to think in their shoes, right? We've tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. As good Christians, we've all tried to do some of this at some point in our lives. But let's be real, guys, right? How many of you guys like are actually doing this like really well right now? How many of you guys have actually like succeeded in this whole loving your enemies thing? Raise your hand if you confidently say, it's like, oh, I got this down, Pastor Danny. No one. Let's be real. Guys, it's really hard. In fact, I'd even dare say that it's straight up impossible. Like, I'm sure you'd all agree with me in theory about everything I just said, right? Like, nothing I just said was contradictory to what was in the Bible. I think all of you guys, up to now, everything I said, you'll be like, you're right, Pastor Danny. Yep. Jesus said to love our enemies. That's what we got to do. Yep. You're right, Pastor Danny. I got to see that person through God's eyes, not my own. You're right, Pastor Danny. You're right. My perception is flawed. Yep. My thoughts are wrong. I am blind. I have to see that person as a loving child of God through God's perspective. All of this is theoretically true, right? But let's say something like this actually happens. All that just goes out the window, guys. Right? You guys will not remember a word that I said during today's sermon. If someone actually comes up to you and does something to you that's really bad, hurts you in some way, insults your mother or your parents, right? Does something to really offend you, to something that really hurts you, mentally, spiritually, or maybe even physically. Everything I'm saying up till now just goes out the window. See, that's why we need this sermon. That's why we need this message, because this is how we can practically and actually achieve God's command in our lives. The first step, we need to first reflect on ourselves. See where we are at. Because in all of our difficult relationships, here's the truth of the matter, guys. You guys were hurt. You were hurt. And that's where it all starts, actually. It all starts with that recognition. You know, a lot of people that I talk to, when I tell them, like, when they come to me with a problem, like a relationship problem, and they say, hey, like, I'm really struggling with this person, like, we're having a hard time. And they explain to me, like, hey, this is what happened, and, like, I'm over it now, like, I'm okay. And I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I don't say that to condemn them, right? I'm saying, the only way to get over this is to acknowledge that you're not okay. That's the first step. The first step is to simply accept that you've been hurt. That's okay. It doesn't mean that you're immature. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It's simply a matter of fact. Accept that you've been hurt. That's not your fault either. It's not your fault you were hurt. You weren't asking to be hurt. Someone just straight up came up and hurt you, intentionally or unintentionally. But the truth of the matter is, you were hurt. You were wronged. You were wounded. Remember what I said last week? I mentioned it in passing because I was going to expound upon it today. But when you are hurt, when you are wounded, I talked about how those wounds turn into scars. And those untreated scars turn into pride. You guys remember that part, right? This is person number 3. It's not your fault, I know. But the truth of the matter is, you have been wounded. And these wounds create a lens. Remember this, right? The lens, it covers your eyes. You guys repeat after me. Wounds create lenses. The title for today's sermon is Blinded by Wounds. It's so true, guys. You guys have no idea how true this is. Once you are wounded, once someone hurts you, in that moment, that split second, you have a new lens put over you. It's kind of scary. And that's the freaky part, right? People have no idea. They have no idea they've been wounded. They have no idea they've been blinded. No, really. There's a you guys know like what the honeymoon phase is in a relationship, right? There's a phrase for it in Korean. It says 콩깍지 right? The phrase in Korean literally means you have something placed over your eyes. That's the honeymoon phase. I'd say that's a pretty accurate statement, right? When you're like just in a relationship, like you don't see anything bad about that person. Like that person's like she's the most beautiful woman in the world. He's like Prince Charming, the one that you've been waiting for like your entire life. Like you don't see the flaws. All you see are like the wonderful, beautiful aspects of it. And the people around you are just like, right? You just sigh when they look at you. During that honeymoon phase, it is safe to say that you are what? Blind. It's true. To a certain degree, you are only seeing partially. You have this lens that's covering your eyes. And you don't even know, do you? You don't even know. And you think all that you see is true. Time passes, and then people start complaining about their relationships. Oh, they've changed. No, they haven't. Your eyes just got better. Right? That's the reality of the matter. They didn't change. They were always that messed up. You just finally started to see how messed up they were. That's all it is, really. See, we don't know how blind we are. It's the exact same principle. You see, this lens doesn't just come during the honeymoon phase. This lens comes the most powerfully when we are wounded, when we're hurt. And it's the opposite lens, isn't it? It's not that we only see the good parts. It's the exact opposite. We only see the bad. There are some practical examples. There was this couple. It's based off a true story, but I'm going to change the names. There was this couple, and the wife actually did something incredibly bad and hurtful. She cheated on her husband. And, turns out the husband doesn't want to divorce because of the children, and also because, the husband still genuinely loves his wife. And he wants to make things work. He wants to forgive her. And he has, right? That's why they're trying to make this work. Now, the wife, here's the wonderful part. The wife is incredibly repentant and sorry. She knows what she did was wrong. And she still loves her husband, and she wants to make it work. Like, she knows that it was a really big mistake. She owned up to it. She admitted it. She apologized. And now, not only does she apologize with words, but she's trying to show with her actions just how much he means to her, right? How sorry she is and how much she wants to make things right. She's really trying. She wants to keep this family together. So she changes the way she does work, right? She cut her time to half time so she can actually serve her family and her husband more. She changes the way she treats her husband. She changes the way she takes care of her kids. She changes everything, and she really tries to show how sorry she is and how much she still loves him. Now get this. Later on, when that couple went to a therapist to talk about, their problems and to see how they were doing, the therapist found out that the husband had absolutely no idea how hard the wife was trying. None. I mean, so the husband's not dumb, right? So you would expect him to say something along the lines of like, Dr. So and so, like Dr. Phil, like, I know my wife is trying, but like it's just not what. No, it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that. He was straight up. He was like, I think my wife is still the same as before. She clearly doesn't love me. I even think she might be cheating on me even now. Does this make any sense to you guys? He didn't know at all. He had no clue. He was what we would call in any other situation, blind. Completely blind. So the therapist dug in deeper and saw and figured out what actually happened. So the wife would do like 9 incredibly awesome things, right? And then she would make like one mistake. Because she's human, right? So she would try so hard and she would get 9 things right. And she'd get one thing wrong. Guess what the husband sees? That one thing. That's all he can see. That one thing. Even after getting back from her own job, like she wants to show him how much she loves him, so she cooks, does laundry, cleans the house, all of these household chores, not because she's obligated to as a wife, but because it's a wonderful way to show someone that you care, right? So she buys him gifts, gives him all the time that he needs. But then one day the husband asks her to pack him a lunch because he's running late, and she says, like, I'm sorry, like we're out of lunch meat. Can you actually buy lunch today? Husband flips out. He's like, look at this, see? She won't even cook for me anymore. Husband focuses all of his attention on the fact that his wife just denied his request and immediately thinks and jumps to the conclusion that his wife doesn't love him. This is a very severe example. It's an exaggerated example, but believe it or not, it's based on a true story. Have you guys ever seen people like this? People who get like hurt over the smallest things? People who like really misunderstand your intentions? Like think the worst about you sometimes? People who jump to conclusions? Have you ever ran into people like that in your lives before? Well, chances are those people were wounded. They were hurt. That husband, he had a lens over his eyes the entire time. Now, the source of that lens was his wife cheating on him, right? Like that was like the moment. He was hurt at that time, and ever since, he would see the world through that lens of his wound. Everything that the wife does, he would see through that lens. He couldn't see the good that she was doing. He literally cannot see all the good stuff that she was doing. He had no idea. Because all he could see through that lens was what she was doing wrong. And oftentimes, it wasn't even wrong, right? Like the whole lunch situation, like that wasn't even her fault. But his lens made it look wrong. Guys, any person with 2 eyes can see how hard the wife is trying, but he couldn't. He actually couldn't. So when the doctor told him, when the therapist told him about all the stuff that his wife was doing for her, like he was like genuinely shocked. He was like, it was like he was hearing it for the first time. He was like, she did that for me? I had no idea. He didn't deny it, right? He was just straight up like shocked. He was like no way. Like, are you serious? Like she actually did that for me? He actually couldn't see. When I experienced this, that's when I first realized, wow, this power of deception really runs strong in these wounds. That's when I realized that. Wow, when people are hurt, they are so blind to reality. These are not dumb people, guys. I've met a lot of dumb people in my life, and it frustrates me. Because sometimes people are just so dumb, and you just. But these people that I've dealt with, this couple that I've actually met, they're not dumb. These are smart people. That's how blindingly deceptive your wounds can make you. When I give a sermon like this, guys, it's so easy for you to think about someone in your life that needs this sermon. I don't know about you guys, but I often do this, right? When I hear like a really convicting sermon, sometimes I'm like, oh man, that's for me. Amen. God, I'm a sinner. I'll repent for you. And then sometimes I'm like, ooh, I know someone who needs to hear this message. I know someone who needs to love more, right? I know someone who needs to repent. That's how we respond sometimes. And it is so easy to think that this is one of those sermons, right? It's so easy right now as I'm preaching right now. Some of you guys may already have some people in your mind. It's like, oh, yep, I need to send this link. I need to send this person this sermon today. They really need to hear it. Well, I mean, go ahead and do so because this is a great sermon for them. But today's sermon, it's not for anyone else. It's for you. Every single one of you in this room right now, this is for you. I don't care how long you've been a Christian for. I don't care how mature you are. I don't care. I really don't care. This one's for you. Today, I'm here to tell you that you were wrong. Why? Because you've all been hurt. We've all been hurt. If there is a single strenuous, tense relationship in your life, don't think for a second that you are not okay, because you're not. You've been hurt. Some of you to the point of being traumatized. Others, maybe not so much. But you have all been wounded to some degree. This is just the unfortunate truth of life, because we're all imperfect human beings. So living with imperfect human beings means being wounded at times. Guys, this is also not a light matter. You see, those wounds will thereafter affect the way that you interact with that person, whether you are aware of it or not. It is that lens that gets placed over you. And you know, when I really think about this, it really, really pisses me off. And I don't say this phrase often, but it really does. Guys, there are a few things in life that genuinely upsets me, and this is one of them. Like when I think about how Satan is using this tactic right now to create a cycle of pain in this world, this is actually one of the few things that blows the lid for me. Let me describe what I see right now in this world for you. Husband gets hurt, right? Let's go back to that example. Husband gets hurt. He gets a lens over his eyes, right? So what do you think he does in response? He responds to his wife through that lens of deception. So his wife is trying, but what does the husband do in return? Because all he sees is that hurt. He hurts her back. Inevitably, he will also hurt her, most likely because of that lens. So now what happens, guys? What happens when you get hurt? You get a lens. So what happens with the wife? She gets a lens. And the cycle continues. You guys see what's going on in this world, dude, don't you? It makes me so angry to see how Satan has brought apart so many marriages, so many families, so many relationships, how he has split up so many parents from their children, so many siblings from each other, so many friends, so many church members from other loving church members through this tactic. This is one of the few things that really legitimately gets me worked up, because I can see how the enemy is turning something so beautiful into something so damaged and so broken. We got to change this. This is why the world is so broken right now. I mean, there are other factors, of course, but it's this sin. I mean, this is what sin is, guys. This is one of the classic consequences of sin. This is why this world is so messed up. This is where we see all the darkness coming from. How do we fix it, guys? How do we change this? It starts with this. 3 words. Same 3 words I told you guys last week. You guys remember? I was wrong. I was wrong. I cannot stress enough how important this is. I was wrong. Not in like an apologetic way. Not like, oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong. No. You're telling yourself, oh, those thoughts that I had in my head, oh, yeah, those thoughts were wrong. What I saw, or what I thought I saw, I was wrong. See, this is how we close every door in our hearts to Satan. This is how we make sure that he has no opportunity to distort the truth in our lives. We don't give him any room. Right? We oftentimes, when someone hurts us, it's so easy for us to think like, oh man, that person is so immature. Man, that person is so hateful. That person is such a blank or a blank. No, no, no. When you have those thoughts, you say to yourself, nope, I was wrong. I was wrong. This is how I close those doors. Guys, wounds open up a door for Satan to creep through. And what I'm telling you to do right now is it's really simple. It's to close that door. It's as simple as that. Just close the door, guys. Close the door. Oh, you know what? Never mind. I was wrong. Okay, I was wrong. I was hurt. I was wounded. And because of that, my thoughts and my vision have become blurred. I'm not going to trust what I see. And instead, I'm going to trust in what God sees. Have you guys ever been to like one of those like carnival, like House of Mirror kind of things? Have you guys ever been in one of those? If you've never been in one, you've at least seen one on TV, right? It's like you walk into a room and like the mirrors are all angled in such a way so you see like 50 reflections of yourself, right? And you try to go a certain direction because it looks like a path, but it's actually just another mirror. It's just a reflection of a path, right? When you're in that house of mirrors, and you see something in front of you, do you go for it automatically? No, you don't. It's like when you see because it's usually a maze, right? So you're trying to get out. When you see, it's like what looks like an exit, you don't go running into it because there's a high chance that it's actually a mirror that's showing you a reflection of that exit, and you're just going to run yourself into glass and make yourself look really dumb, right? So even though you see the door right there, you're gonna carefully try to see if there's anything in front of you. You don't trust your own eyes when you're in that place, do you? Why? Because you know that place is a place of illusions. The whole point of that place is to deceive what you see with your eyes. Well, this is the exact same situation, guys. We need to recognize that our vision has been compromised. What we see when we are hurt are oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes illusions. Slight distortions of reality. So what do? We make that decision not to rely on what we see. Guys, you see, the interesting thing is that oftentimes we might even be right. Like what you see about that person might even be right. It might even be right. Let's say like someone like takes your sandwich and you're like, wow, that's rude. There's a good chance that you're right. That person is very rude. But this is what I'm saying. You throw that thought away. Now, maybe that person actually genuinely thought that it was theirs. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. There's this one story that gives me cringes every time, but it also kind of warms my heart up. There are different versions all the time, but there's a story about how this one girl was sitting at an airport and she got like a bag of cookies, and they were like really good cookies, and she was really looking forward to eating that bag of cookies. Do some of you guys know the story? And then the guy sitting next to her just all of a sudden just reaches into the bag and starts eating her cookies. She's like, what the heck is he doing, right? And he doesn't even ask. He's just reading his paper and he's just grabbing cookies, her cookies, and he's eating them. She's like furious, right? So whenever he grabs a cookie, she grabs a cookie. And at the very end, there's one cookie left. They've each been eating a cookie like that, and there's one cookie left. And this guy, do you know what he does? He takes the cookie, he splits it in half, he smiles, and he hands it to her. And this girl's like, what in the world is this guy thinking? Who does he think he is? Splitting my cookie and offering me half and then smiling? She's furious, right? And then, so she I forget what she did. I think she smacks his hand, doesn't even take the cookie, and then she boards the plane. She goes through her bags, and then she finds a full bag of cookies. They bought the same bag of cookies. She was eating from his. You guys have never heard this before, have you? So it's a very cringeworthy story, but at the same time, if you think about it from the guy's perspective, it's like, wow, that guy didn't judge for a second. He very easily could have judged her, and
passed his opinion on how rude or selfish or weird of a person she was, but no, he decided against that. There must have been a reason. When people cut me off in traffic, it really upsets me. But you know what I normally think to kind of calm my anger is like, oh man, that person must need to go to the bathroom so bad. Like, I don't know if you've all been there, but stuck in traffic when you need to go to the bathroom. It's like, you will speed and you will cut people off. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Thinking in other people's shoes, guys. Realizing that your thoughts about someone else, your original perception, may not be right. In fact, there's a good chance that it's straight up wrong. Toss out your thoughts, guys. Just throw them away. Even if they're right, throw them away. Because chances are they're very heavily, heavily tainted by your wounds. Chances are we're seeing through a lens. And we are very, very wrong. So don't take that chance. Throw your thoughts away. Even if you're right, that thought won't do you any good. We'll talk about that a little later. But when we look at others, we need to see from someone else's third-party perspective. Someone else who is not colored by the previous wounds that I've received. Someone who can see that person for who they really are. Someone who can actually see the best in that person because they see through a different lens. Not a lens of distorted truth through wounds, but a lens through Christ's atonement on the cross. Dearly beloved, we need to see through God's eyes. That's what we need. We need to see each other through God's eyes. And that's where the beauty of today's message comes in. Once you start seeing through God's eyes, you start seeing into people's hearts. 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, right? But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance. This is when Samuel was trying to pick the next king and before he anoints David. God says to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. This isn't just about our physical appearance. Oftentimes we interpret this verse as saying, like, people are really shallow. We just see the outward appearance, but God looks at our hearts. It's more than that. It's more than that. It's not just about our looks. It's also about our circumstances, our situations, our everything. We judge people based on what we see, but God judges based on what's in our hearts. And when we start looking through God's perspective, we can start seeing into people's hearts. Here's a representation of what happens when we're hurt. There's a beautiful analogy that I love so much. It just describes all of us so well. Have you guys ever seen a porcupine in real life? Have you ever seen one like in real, or you've at least seen pictures, right? What's the trademark image of a porcupine? What does it have? Spikes. Yeah. Well, that's what we all are. We're all porcupines. And when we try to get close to each other, what do? Poke each other. Some of us straight up get stabbed, right? Not even poked. Some of us get wounded pretty badly. Well, that's what we are. We're all porcupines. And we all stab each other, whether we like it or not. There was this one Korean movie I saw. I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you guys before, but it's this random like Korean rom-com. It's the message of the whole movie is it's not that great, but there was this one scene that I saw that just really like resonated with me for some reason, and it really stuck with me. And it changed the way that I view relationships ever since. But it's this rom-com about this like newlywed couple. And it's just a story of these two people who are just so madly in love, and they're recently married, and it's just their life, their story. And it shows a progress of when they started dating, just how just passionately they were in love, and then it shows them like during their marriage, it shows that fizzling out and turn into like real conflict in their relationship. And there was this one scene that really kind of sparked, it really made things really bad. The problems in their life, in their marriage, started happening when both the husband and the wife were going through a bunch of crap in their lives. That's when the movie just took like a dark turn. Because up until that time, it's like one of those like really corny and cheesy like love stories. Like, oh, like the guy like serenades her, and you know I don't want to go into detail. But at one point, the girl has a serious health issue. and she has problems like in her intestines, and she tries to tell her husband. She's like, hey, like we need to talk, but the husband's like I'm sorry, let's talk tomorrow. Like I'm really not having a good day. And the husband at the same time, someone that he really loved and cared for at work, like someone who was older, just passed away. Someone that he genuinely felt a connection to passed away at work. So they're both going through really difficult situations in their lives. And these are two people throughout the entire movie who genuinely loved each other. And you saw that all throughout. But you saw the conflict start happening when they were both going through these difficult moments in their lives. Now the wife threw out some old books that were left in the foyer. Turns out those old books were the last gift that the man who died gave to the husband. So they meant a lot to him. But the wife threw it out because she didn't know. So the husband starts yelling at her. It's like, do you know what this means to me? In the midst of that argument, the wife collapses on the floor because of her stomach problems. Husband has no idea because he's already mad that she threw away his books. So he storms off out of the house and leaves his wife, who is crumpled up on the floor in the kitchen, and he had no idea. She gets taken over to the ER and has surgery without even the husband knowing. You guys see what's going on here? Whose fault is it? No one's. Right? It's no one's fault. You can't blame one or the other. They're both going through a really hard time in their lives, but what did they both end up doing? Looking at themselves. When they're not going through a hard time and when someone else is, it's so easy to care for that person. It's so easy to gear your attention on their hurts and on their pains, on their difficulty. It's so easy to give a helping hand. But what about when you are hurt, huh? Right? What about when you're going through a hard time? Not so easy to see someone else's pain, is it? Because that's how our psychology works. When we are hurt, when we are in pain, this is where our gaze goes. To myself. Our eyes naturally gravitate toward ourselves, toward our own thorns, our own wounds and pains in our hearts. That's what needs to change. We need to take those thorns out first. When we start seeing through God's eyes, guys, that's what happens. We acknowledge that we have thorns in our hearts. That's what we're doing. Is that we're saying, God, I'm hurt. I'm wounded. God, there's a lens over my eyes. I'm only seeing from my one very limited hurt perspective. We go before God acknowledging that we were wrong. Then what God does is he takes those thorns out one by one. He heals our hearts from the inside. God's the one to heal us step by step. And then it's his eyes that we receive. We can start seeing each other through his eyes. Not my thorns, right? But through his eyes. I can start understanding why that person may have done that act. Or why that person may have said those words. I don't just judge from my perspective anymore, right? Because now I can start to see in their shoes because I'm looking at them through God's perspective. I can see that person for who they really are. I can see how precious that person actually is because now I'm looking through the lens of Christ's atonement. I'm not looking at the flaws. I'm looking at the restored glory. And when you start looking at the world through this lens, you start to see the reality of how beautiful this world is supposed to be. And you can see what Satan is trying to do. And you know what you feel after that? Anger. Holy anger towards the enemy. And you start feeling compassion and love toward those who are still being influenced by him. And then that's how you can genuinely love your enemies. You guys know the phrase, love this, what is it? Hate the sin, but love the sinner. That phrase has been misused and abused in so many different ways. But the truth of that phrase is very true. It's very true. Yeah, hate the sin. Hate what Satan's doing in this world. Absolutely. You got to love the sinner, though. And you can do that when you see through God's perspective. That's how we can actually obey Jesus' command to love our enemies. Guys, can you guys imagine how hard that command actually is? Can any of you guys here actually love your enemies? The best example of this, of someone who actually succeeded in this to a certain degree, other than Jesus, is someone named Pastor Son. 손양원 목사님, right? He's very famous. I know I've already mentioned him several times in my previous sermons. But there's a book about him, the Atomic Bomb of Love. Basically, to cut a long story short, Pastor Son, he lost his sons. There was a communist young man that came up and shot his 2 sons. Long story short, his 2 sons were murdered. Guess what he did to that murderer? He adopted him as his own son. Who does that? Who does that? Like, actually, who does that? Can you guys even imagine what it must be like to have your children killed? Most of you don't have children, so we probably can't relate to that. Can you imagine what it must be like to have one of your family members that you genuinely care about killed, murdered, intentionally? What do you think you do to that person? I know what I'd do. That's not pretty. This guy not only defends him in court, he tells the judge that he wants to adopt him. He tells the judge to set him free. Guys, how did he do it? He threw away his thoughts and decided to see through God's eyes instead. Guys, I'm sure he had his thoughts come up. I mean, come on, guys. He's not Jesus. He's human, right? So when he saw the face of the murder of his sons, what do you think came inside of him first? Anger. Oh, I'm sure. Oh, it's that bastard right there. He's the one. He's the one that did it. Anger, frustration, sorrow. I'm sure every time he looks at the face of that guy, that murderer, I'm sure he remembers his 2 sons. I'm positive he remembers them. How can you not, right? As a good father, how can you not remember the face of your 2 beloved sons who died at the hands of that person? Every time he sees that person, I'm sure he's reminded of them. And then his thoughts come up. That's the one. He's the evil one. But this is the incredible part of Pastor Son. This is where he does something incredible. He decides to throw those thoughts away. When I see him as a murderer, but you know what, God? I'm not going to look at that anymore. Because God, I'm blind. I've been hurt. I've been hurt by that man. And I'm so blind. I'm blinded by what I have received. I'm blinded by my wounds. My thoughts are not accurate. So I'm not going to rely on my thoughts or my feelings anymore. God, I want to see through your eyes. And when he saw that man through God's eyes, he saw how precious he was. He saw how lost he was. So he adopted him, led him to Christ. And ultimately, Pastor Son was the one who received the greatest benefit, heaven in his heart. He could have chosen to live with hate and regret for the rest of his life, but he chose to receive peace, to forgive, and to live with heaven for the rest of his life. Guys, it harms us to remain hurt. It does us no good. And that's why I was telling you since last week that scars and wounds, that's what it leads to pride. It does you no good. We have to get rid of these hurts in our lives. Now here's the thing. In some ways it's really unfair. It really is, because this is what I'm basically doing. I'm asking those of you who have been hurt, I'm asking the victims to forgive. Nowhere in the world do you see this, right? Society usually says, "Oh, you're a victim? Man, I'm so sorry for you. Like, hey, let me be on your side. Like, oh man, that person deserves to die. Hey, you're totally justified." This is how the world works. That's humanism for you right there. But what I'm saying right now is I'm telling the victims in harsh language, I'm basically telling you to get over it and to forgive. Not because it's fair for you, because it's really not. I'm really sorry. It's really unfair for you. I'm not telling the ones who caused the pain to ask for forgiveness. I'm asking those who have been hurt to forgive. Why? Because it's for your sakes. Because this is what's better for you as the forgiver. That's why forgiveness is for myself. That's why when I forgive and love others, I'm the one to reap the greatest benefit there. Because heaven is not here or there, heaven is in our hearts. And this is exactly how we receive it. This is how we overcome the lens that we receive when we are hurt. It's by admitting that we are wrong. We're wrong. I don't know if you guys can relate with just how blind we can be sometimes. Let me just give you one more example, and then I'll give you the conclusion, and we'll finish for today. But there was this another person that I was counseling in my old church, and she comes up to me and she says, Pastor Danny, this person really hates my kids. And I'm like, well, okay, like what do they do? And she explained, she's like, oh yeah, they did this, and then they yelled at my kids like this, and then this is what they did. And it's like, clearly they hate my kids. So I tried to counsel her, and I was like, you know what? From everything you just told me, that really is what it looks like. Like I can see why you feel that way. I get you. You know, you might be right. But the fact of the matter is, I know this person that you speak of, and I know this person does not hate anyone. So something's not matching up here, because I know this person does not hate your kids. But what you are telling me, I agree, sounds like this person hates your kids. Something is not matching up here. Let's find out. Long story short, the moral of that story was, she was what? Wrong. She was wrong. Because she was seeing through her own lens. There was a reason for all of those interactions. There was a reason. And the truth was behind those reasons. But guys, we just can't see those when we're so blind to our own pains. Guys, remember the 4 types of people? The 4th type? The type that we all want to be. This is the conclusion. Let me summarize now. That 4th type, the one that we all want to be, that type barely gets hurt. That's why we all need to strive for that person. They barely get hurt because they are protected by the truth of who they are. Because they're so firm in themselves, they know who they are. And they know who others are because they already see through God's perspective. They see themselves through God's perspective. So when someone tries to poke them, like, it doesn't really have much of an effect because they already know. It's like, okay, I mean, you can try to poke me all you want, but I mean, I know who I am. So the thorn either goes very, really shallow, like poking, or it doesn't even pierce them at all. This is the type of person that we need to all strive to be. But now here's the thing, this takes time. But eventually we need to all strive to be like this, to be like Jesus. To be so firm and secure enough to be able to say, even while he's dying on the cross, to be able to say, Father, forgive these people. They don't know what they're doing. Father, they have no idea what they're doing. They're doing this out of ignorance. God, forgive them. You know, some people come to the church expecting a perfect place, a perfect community, and they could not be more wrong. Yes, the church should be held to a higher degree of accountability. And yes, we, the church, should live by a higher standard of morals and ethics, because we always talk about it, right? And it's true, I agree. But in reality, those are all things that we aim for, right? Because in reality, we're just as broken as everyone else in the world. And I know I say this all the time, but you don't go to a hospital expecting everyone to be healthy there, do you? Oh, there's so many doctors in the hospital. Why isn't everyone healthy? No, you don't say that. The church is no different. The church is full of sinners who are trying to get better. Patients in a spiritual hospital, so to speak. We're all patients to some degree. It is a community full of porcupines. Guys, I love this analogy. This is a house of porcupines. The closer you put them together, the more they are bound to poke each other and stab each other. This is the reality of human depravity. You guys know where you see the most severe of arguments? Like where the most severe conflict in relations happen? You guys know where it is? It's not school. It's not work. It's not even the church. Where do we fight the most, guys? Home. Home. Is it because we don't love each other? No. Think about the reality of the situation. You just confined 4 or 5 porcupines in one tiny little box called home. What's going to happen? New York homes are even smaller. Actually, it's an even smaller box than other places. I'm sorry that you guys have to live here. It makes it that much easier for us to poke each other. I kid you not. They just keep poking. And whenever they get hurt, they don't care about the others, right? You don't care about your family members when you get hurt. All you see is how badly you were wounded. Guys, this is the world that we live in. This is what sin has done to us. But guess what Jesus did? Guess what Jesus did, guys? Jesus comes and he hugs the porcupine. That's what he's doing. He would be wounded, poked, stabbed, bloodied, but he still hugs the porcupine nonetheless. Right? Because think about it, no one's perfect here. We're all sinners. We're all porcupines. But despite our sins, despite our shortcomings and all our problems, Jesus doesn't keep his distance. He draws near to us. You guys remember that picture, right? The picture that we had? Jesus doesn't see all that stuff on the bottom. He sees us completely differently. Remember what I said about God being omniscient, right? He knows everything. God's not dumb, guys. He knows all this stuff, all that stuff on the bottom. He knows that that's all still there. He knows that we still have sin, imperfection, failure in our lives. He knows how prideful and selfish human beings can be. When God says that he forgets our sins, it doesn't mean that he literally doesn't remember them. It means that he still chooses to hug us, knowing that those existing spikes will pierce into him when he does so. That's what that picture means. That's what it means to view through God's eyes. That's what Jesus did for us. That's what Jesus did for all of you. In the midst of all your imperfections, in the midst of all your spikes, he chose to bear the blunt of it all and still hug you. Guys, that's what it means to view through God's eyes. It means being able to hug others even when we can see their flaws. Dearly beloved, this is Jesus, and it will take a long time for most of us to get to this level. And yes, sometimes it's wiser to avoid certain people who have too many thorns, but we don't need to talk about that today. Like, there are evil people in this world, right? Some people who are just so influenced by Satan to the point where we can call them evil. And, we still need to love those people in our hearts, but sometimes it's actually wiser to avoid those people in our lives. But ultimately, our goal is to be like Jesus. To be able to hug even the pointiest of porcupines. Guys, some people have gone beyond being porcupines. They're like straight up like snakes, like poisonous snakes. There's nothing lovable about them. We don't have a single person like that here in this room. You guys don't have a single person like that in your families. That means that any conflict or tension that you do have is a result of a series of misunderstandings and mistakes. It's a result of those lenses that have been cast over our eyes. Guys, no one is willingly hurting anyone here. No one is that evil. Like I'm saying, there are a few people in the world that are really straight up evil. But no one's like that here. No one's like that in your families. You guys genuinely love each other. You're broken and messed up. You're sinful. That's what the problem is. But everyone loves each other, or at least wants to. That means that our conflicts are a result of those lenses in our lives. If we can merely start seeing how wrong we can be, how easily deceived that lens over our eyes can make us, then we can start opening our eyes to the truth of the matter. We can start casting aside this deception, this pain, these wounds, and we can start to see through God's eyes. We can admit, I was wrong, and we can enjoy the heaven that results because of that admission. That's why we read from Proverbs today, where it says, lean not on your own understanding, trust in the Lord, because our own understanding is so flawed. That's how we can love each other truly as Jesus had loved us. John 15, verse 12. This is also what we read. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Those two verses in Proverbs and John, they might seem completely unrelated, but if you piece them together, it's a powerful message. Don't lean on your your wounded understanding. Trust in me. And that is how you can obey this commandment, to love one another as I have loved you. Guys, just like when you were pointy porcupines, sinners, I came down and I hugged you. I drew you into my heart. It pierced my skin. It made me bleed and it hurt, but I chose to hug you nonetheless. Can you do this for the other people in your lives? As this is what it means to love as I have loved you. I've loved you. I've loved you.